Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's meeting of the Children and Family Scrutiny Board. For those of you that don't know me, my name's on the screen, Councillor Dan Cohen, and I'll be chairing today's meeting. The meeting is being webcast on the Council's website so that anybody who may be interested but is unable to join us in person and enjoy our great selection of biscuits and mince pies is able to observe remotely, albeit without our biscuits and mince pies. And please do help yourself to said biscuits and mince pies. Can I invite members of the board to introduce themselves? And can I also remind you, once you've spoken, to please mute your microphone, lest the camera rest on you for all time. So if we crack on to the left, thank you.
Good morning, I'm Helen Bellamy, School Staff Representative.
Morning, Tony Britton, representing the Roman Catholic Diocese of Leeds.
Good morning, Councillor Karen Renshaw, representing Housing Robin Hood Ward.
Morning, Andrew Graham, representing the Church of England Diocese of Leeds.
Good morning, Councillor Lisa Martin, Roundhay Ward.
Councillor Jules Heselwood, Wheatwood Ward.
Councillor Caroline Gruen, Bramley and Stanningy Ward.
Good morning, everyone. Councillor Jordan Bowden, Roundhay Ward.
Good morning, Councillor Oliver Edwards, representing Guiseley and Rawdon Wards.
Good morning, everyone. Councillor Killamanaka for Bermondsey and Richmond Hill.
Morning, Helen Goddard from Public Health Team.
Morning, Catherine Ingold, Chief Officer in Public Health for Children and Families.
Good morning, Councillor Jonathan Pryor. I'm Deputy Leader of Leeds City Council and Executive Member for Economy, Culture and Education.
Good morning, Farah Khan, Deputy Director for Children's Social Care.
Sorry, I was pushing cuffs. As officers are introducing themselves at this stage, I'm Phil Evans. I'm the Chief Officer for Transformation and Partnerships within the Children's and Families Directorate.
Good morning, Kath Lennon, Interim Chief Officer Learning Capacity for Leeds Children and Families.
Good morning, I'm Andrew Scopes. I'm a councillor for the Beeson Holbert Ward and I'm here as the Scrutiny Chair for Adults Health and Active Lifestyles. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. I'm Councillor Sandy Lay. I'm here representing Otley and Yeadon Ward, and for item 7, the impact of vaping on children and young people, after I'd brought it to Scrutiny Board on behalf of a number of councillors within the cross-political divide.
Councillor Rick Downs, Otley and Yeadon Ward.
Good morning, Councillor David Blackburn, Barnley and Wortley Ward.
Good morning, Anas Keto, Parent Governor for Primary School.
Morning, Kate Black, a co-opted member.
Good morning, Jocelyn Ward, co-opted member.
Hello, Ryan Stevenson, Councillor for Harewood.
Good morning, Councillor Dawn Seary, Pudsey Ward.
Morning, everyone. Rob Clayton, I'm the Scrutiny Advisor to the board.
Thank you, everybody, for that. Let's go through the preliminary parts of the agenda. Rob, do we have any appeals against the refusal of inspection of documents?
There are no appeals, Chair.
Any items for exclusion?
There are none, Chair.
Any late items of business?
There are no late items, Chair.
May I ask if any board members have any declarations of interest, and I will take silence as none. Splendid. Apologies.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we have apologies from Julie Longworth, the Director of Children and Families, Councillor Salma Arif, the exec member who would have been attending under item 7 for public health, Councillor Venner, also apologies from Councillor Venner as exec member, and also Councillor Senior, Morley member, and Nick Tones, one of our co-opted members. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And can we formally welcome Mr. Anas Kittu, who's attending his first meeting today, our new primary school parent governor, and also formally welcome Councillor Dawn Seary as our new member. She did attend the working group the other day, but formally welcome to you both to what is undoubtedly the finest scrutiny board on Leeds City Council, certainly the biggest. Okay, everybody, let's crack on then to the item 6, which are the minutes, which we will seek to approve the minutes of our last meeting on the 4th of October as a correct record. And I will go through in the usual way, one page at a time. Please speak out loud if there are any issues. So, page 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and finally 16. So we're happy to approve those as a true record. Thank you, Councillor Renshaw. We could get through the whole meeting quicker, quicker. I just went through page number by page number. Okay, well, that brings us to item 7, impact of vaping on children and young people, and update. Can I specifically thank Councillor Sandy Lay and Councillor Scopes for coming along to this meeting, and Rob, I'll hand over to you if I may.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So this item follows a consideration in July and at our last meeting in October of the impact of vaping on children and young people. The July session had quite a considerable discussion from board members and the guests that Councillor Cohen has just mentioned. And following some changes in government policy and government approach on this since our last meeting in October, namely the tobacco and vapes bill, this is an update on that, and also a recent analysis of a call for evidence that was done over the summer. So the report provides an update on those issues and some of the government intentions. One of the key aspects of that is an ongoing consultation into the smoke-free generation proposals, which does cover elements of smoking, but actually substantially the questions relate to youth vaping and measures that the government are considering to tackle that. Amongst those, potentially making them restricting the sale of them, of disposable vapes, and the timeframes for that, which I think covers a lot of the discussion that the board had in July. So at Appendix 1, there is a suggested, for comment today and for approval today, suggested submission to that consultation. That closes on the 6th of December, so a week today. If board members were happy with that, I'd be happy to submit that on behalf of the board, but obviously subject to comments and discussion today, should there be any. The elements of that consultation that relate to smoking sit with outside of the remit of this board, so they are left without comment, and also the board did not cover it in previous discussions, so we haven't filled those in. And as I understand it, it is possible to submit a consultation with those fields left blank should we wish to. So I think that summarises it, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thanks. So I asked Rob to capture what we had said in previous meetings to populate questions 5 through to, going to get this wrong now, 27, I think it is. And that's what was circulated on the papers to everybody. I realise that, and I'm sure everyone has read these through beforehand. So essentially, the proposal is that this is what we would submit to the consultation. There isn't really, with everything else going on, it's then a question of whether the feeling is as a board that we then need to continue with that piece of work in this year, or whether we then see where legislation, formal legislative proposals go, and move from there. So this effectively would form I suppose, our recommendations, but to government as part of a national consultation. So that's essentially the proposal. Over to you, really. Second to it. So yeah, colleagues from public. When I say over to anybody that wants to say anything on what's before us. There we go. Sandy kicking us off.
Thanks, Chair. I think that's a reasonable suggestion, to be fair, for this board to go down a different route whilst there is government discussion on law changes would not be a good use of this board's time, I suspect. There are concerns, of course, around the political will and the political timing of whether such legislation is brought forward. So my view would be, for the moment, we park it, to use a modern term, we park it and wait and see what happens. But the board has done its job, in my view. I think you mentioned in one of the government documents, we were actually mentioned as as part of this process. So I think for the moment, there's not a lot more the board can do. We should apply pressure if the legislation doesn't come forward, or if that is the or if legislation doesn't come, a two-pronged approach would be to apply pressure to whichever government makes up the next government, whilst looking at what we could do locally within the scope that this council has.
Thank you, Sandy. I mean, my view would be, obviously it's the next municipal year. I don't know who will be sat here at that point. But I think it would be useful to make sure that at that meeting, it's on the agenda as for what the board want to do with that the following year. Certainly if it's me, I would be wanting to make sure that we had a plan, even that plan was continued watching brief. I think it's important it doesn't fall off the agenda altogether. Colleagues from public health or anybody?
Thank you. I suppose I would just like to say, from public health perspective, we really appreciate your interest and support around vaping. It was great to have that debate and discussion in July. It's fabulous that national events have overtaken the work that we were planning to do, and it's absolutely wonderful the proposals that Chris Whitty, the Chief Medical Officer, has pushed through. If they're passed, they will be one of the biggest public health impacts have happened since smoke-free public places and maybe even seatbelts. And we would urge you to respond to the consultation because it's very powerful as a board, also as individuals, and through any other networks and routes you've got to support the likelihood of this happening. Also, at the last meeting, we talked about big legislative changes. We also talked about local action. And there is an update. There is quite a lot of action that's been happening that my colleague Helen could share if that's of interest to the board.
Thanks, Catherine. So yeah, I echo what Catherine said. We really appreciate kind of the support on this, and really encourage everyone to respond as individuals as well, because the more responses we get in support of this, then the more likely we're going to get this passed. But there's been lots of work underway to try and kind of sort of discourage youth vaping and sort of prevent young people from starting. So we've kind of pushed out lots of materials out to schools in terms of posters and parent and carer leaflets, which were produced by Ash and Sheffield City Council, along with a short animation and some various lesson plans. And then we've also launched a recent comms campaign and set up a small contract with West Yorkshire Trading Standards to really push on some localised work around kind of underage sales, particularly in Leeds, of vapes. So we've put things out via sort of corporate comms, as well as getting things out on community hub screens and libraries, Facebook campaigns, and via various internal channels as well. So hopefully you might have seen some things. We also put a press release out last week, which was picked up by the Yorkshire Evening Post. So it was sat on the front page of the Yorkshire Evening Post, printed out in shops, where it would have sat next to a load of vape displays. So hopefully it's had some impact and got people talking. And in just 2 days worth of visits, trading standards have been out. And in Leeds City Centre, they managed to visit 13 retailers, of which 3 were compliant with trading standards around vapes. So there's a clear issue. Again, Morley, 3 out of 5 retailers were compliant. And in Middleton and Hunslet, sort of LS10, LS11, they visited 18 retailers and only 4 were compliant. So there's a real issue in terms of that compliance with oversized vapes. And there's lots of anecdotal information coming from retailers that parents or sort of older adults are buying for young people on their behalf, which is a real issue. So it's just those 2 days of visits has generated a lot of insight, and we're looking at in depth into the My Health, My School data to help try and really pinpoint some key areas around Leeds where we can kind of focus some of that energy and really put out some more campaigns. And phase 2 in the new year, we'll be looking at trying to target some messages to young people directly as well. So lots of work going on underway. So we're sort of keen to keep pushing these key messages out and do something for Leeds locally.
Could I add a little story? A very little story. A friend has a child with his twins in a Leeds school who are 7, and she commended public health on whatever we're doing because her children came home. They had personal social health education session on vaping. They're 7. And they said, Mummy, vapes are good for people that smoke to try and help them stop smoking. But the tobacco industry are trying to manipulate children to smoke, and they're selling vapes and gummy bear flavours, and it's really bad and we need to not smoke. How great is that? 7-year-olds understanding.
I'd say 7-year-olds saying the word manipulate.
Maybe they didn't say manipulate, but you get my point. They understood.
Forgive me. Yes, no, absolutely. It's reassuring when young people come home with those positive messages. Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Chair. I do think Councillor Scopes did have his hand up before me, but okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. So thank you to the officer who drafted the proposed response to this. I can see that a lot of work's gone into it. And this is just a genuine question. On question 7, the suggested response is that the flavours should be limited to tobacco, mint, menthol and fruits. Now, as I say, I'm not an expert in this area, but I am interested in the way that the industry do try and sell to children. So why would we want fruits included in there? Just a genuine question. Thank you.
I can probably answer that.
The wording says restrict flavours. That's why administrations to restrict vape flavours to children and young people. So we've gone for option C, which says limited, restrict flavours limited. Oh, I see what you're saying. But I read that as we didn't want any of those.
Because of the adult thing. Let Helen look at it.
Yeah, Helen, could we bring you in?
Yeah, so I think with the flavours, I think it's quite a divisive topic, and people feel that it should be tobacco and mint. But so the fruit flavours have been around for a long time. Sort of when sort of e-cigarettes were initially introduced as a quitting tool, and then they started to get marketed and were picked up by younger people and were sort of almost advertised as a new habit. The fruit flavours are still really helpful for adults who are trying to quit smoking. So our Stop Smoking service, we offer vapes in menthol, tobacco and 3 different fruit flavours. And a proportion of our patients will opt for that fruit flavour and have said that they feel they wouldn't have utilised that vape as a quit aid had they not had that fruit flavour. So I think what we would like to see is fruit flavours available, but very limited. And it's more around kind of restricting how they are advertised. So you would have simple strawberry flavour described as strawberry flavour rather than strawberry fizz or strawberry cheesecake, or combining multiple fruit flavours. So it's about trying to restrict it in a way that still makes it appealing for adults or smokers who want that support to quit. So I think it's a tricky one, but I think the issues around the advertising is key, and sort of limiting the flavours but not completely banning everything.
far be it from me to ever impose myself. I had to say my own view on this was that B was the better option, but obviously I wanted to bring to the board what was with my children and family scrutiny. My view was B personally was the better option, but so I'll go
Option D, which isn't there. It's restrict vote flavours to children and young people.
Well, that comes in
But
later on.
we want them banned for children and young people, don't we?
That comes in later on. If you look at some of the deeper later questions, I'll try and bring everybody. If anybody wants to come in specifically on this, what I'm going to do specifically on this, I'm just going to kind of whip round. We can keep it fairly, yeah. And then we'll bring, I've got people who want to come in on other bits and I'll still bring those people in.
You can see that advertising is a massive issue, but I think young people are going to want choice. And I think if it was menthol and the tobacco flavour and just fruit, just one fruit option, I think that, I know this isn't one of the options on here, but I think if you want to have that option for adults who are not going to take up vapes in order to get to, quit the habit, giving one fruit option, but taking away that fruit and the variety of fruit and the attractiveness of having that choice.
If you want to speak as we just go around, feel free to jump in. If you don't no. So I'm bringing people in specifically on this point before we move on. So we will. Do you want to come in, Andy?
One of my thank you, Councillor. I just comment on this one first because it was one of my points. I was going to propose B, and the reason for that is because I've seen a number of adverts in and around schools, sort of strawberry cream, and I understand your point about the marketing, and I guess for me the priority here is trying to restrict young people getting addicted to vapes. And so just on this point, I'd like to come in again if you allow, Chair, but just on this point, I would support option B in terms of that's what I would propose if it was me doing it.
I think the key point to remember is we're the Children and Family Scrutiny Board. So our approach is going to be very much skewed from our interest base. Karen? Yeah, no?
Yes, I would support option B for the reason that you gave and Councillor Scopes, because cigarettes are flavoured menthol tobacco, and so if it's about getting people off cigarettes, they don't need strawberry and orange and lemon. That I think is specifically to lure in children. So thank you.
Yeah, I absolutely support B as well. I won't repeat but all the reasons that colleagues have said.
I just think you need to know the majority view on this committee, and I agree with what colleagues have said about option B. It would be my preference for all the reasons said. I'm an ex-smoker, and why would I want a strawberry vape? Absolutely not.
Carrying on round. Yeah, okay. Yeah, go for it.
Thanks, Chair. Whilst I'll accept what people say, I'll just put a slightly contrary view of knowing somebody who has smoked for years, not me, knowing somebody that's smoked for years and years and years cannot stand mint or menthol. And when the banana flavour came available, that actually took them off of tobacco. It's an adult. I know this is for children, and for children, I absolutely think there shouldn't be any access to fruit. But what do you do about an adult? And it's just asking a question. What do you do about an adult that's managed to quit smoking, gone on to banana vapes, and then you take that away? They're going to go back to smoking. That's the comment I would make about that for adults, but this is for children, and I totally support the stance for children. But I think you just need to be aware of if somebody's come off of tobacco, because I accept that some people don't want to go to fruit, but some people have different tastes, and that's what, that's the contrary view.
Many thanks, David.
I support going for B. As somebody else who used to smoke, I mean, the fact is you don't want to introduce people to something that tastes nice. You want it to taste like a cigarette, and it doesn't taste very nice when you first start smoking.
Yeah.
Yeah, just for the question, you put children and young people. So maybe we have to deal with the children different than young people, or are we including children and young people, or it's only limited to young people? Why we put the children in the question here?
It's just our board is everyone under 18.
Sorry.
Maybe I'm misunderstanding your question.
Yeah, you put flavors in the question. It's mentioned children and young people. So are we gonna deal? If this question will answer, the option is for both children and young people.
Yes. Yeah, I think that we could have. We're using it as a cumulative term, children and young people. It could have equally just said children or equally just said young people. I think Rob was just borrowing from the language of our board title. Everyone, minors, anyone under 18. Thanks.
Yeah, so my comment was, I think we need to look at what the question is actually asking us, and it's asking us what we think is the most effective way to restrict vape flavours to children and young people. And if we actually answer that specific question, then it seems to be a consensus view, save that there are obviously some observations around some preferences of adults, which obviously there is a tension there. But if we're looking at specifically the wording of the question and the remit of our board and the general consensus view, I think it would be that it's B. And then you can obviously make the comment in the box that you acknowledge that there will be an issue in respect of some adults. But I think, you factored that into sort of how you've reached the decision on C. And I think that's the wrong way of approaching it in terms of actually answering the question. And then I do have another point, but I'll wait to deal with that. Yeah, thank you.
I think as well, if like our board goes to up to 25s, young people go up to the age 25. I'm coming from a different perspective, because I actually work in a shop with vapes and the rest, but a lot of adults come in and they use the fruit vapes, and I would worry about them going back to tobacco products. Now, all these things are behind the counter and we have an age thing, so people can't actually take things unless they're age. But I think for me, we have to get a different mindset on people in general, because I think people think vapes are safe. And that is the mindset that we need to change. It's not about vapes or it's not about cigarettes. It's about the mindset. Everybody thinks vapes are safe for children. Well, not for children, but safe for people in general. And I think the mindset needs to be changed, as well as everything else. But I think B for the board. Yeah.
Thanks, Chair. I think, as ever, these consultation questions are really poorly worded. I think Kate's right on that, because changing the flavours isn't going to answer the question of restricting flavour availability to young people. The fact is, it should be illegal to sell to young people, and what we're dealing with is the fact they're being advertised towards young people. So that angle is the only thing that can restrict the element to young people, and it's because of that I favour option C, because I think my role as a scrutiny board member is to almost set aside what my personal views might be and listen to the evidence put before us. And I've just heard from Public Health England, public health colleagues, that there is a purpose for fruit flavours in terms of getting people off cigarettes, to do that. And I think on the flip side of it, I think about 5 years ago, the European Parliament banned menthol cigarette sales because people were choosing menthol because it was nicer flavour and they were still getting their nicotine hit. The flip reverse is then happening here. We're trying to push people into vaping to get off of cigarettes, and it's not just about flavour, it's about getting that hit, I suppose, in a healthier way. I suppose a bit like methadone in a way, isn't it? It's at least the worst options off onto something else. So it's clearly there for a reason. If we're hearing evidence from public health colleagues that for the adults, fruits are needed to get them there, then then on that basis, option C is clearly the most sensible thing based on the data to hand. I think we need to shape the answer by saying actually restricting flavours isn't the way we're going to stop children vaping. What we need to do is sort out the enforcement issues and the advertising issues, and that's the way to stop it going. So I am in favour of option C, but I think it needs to be couched in the terms of, because that focuses on the adults, and actually the things that we need to sort out for the children are the other points in the consultation.
Thank you, Chair. I disagree, Ryan, sorry. I think we do need to go for option B because we're here for the children, not the adults. And I think, I can't remember who said it over there, we need to repurpose the answer to say we're coming from a children's point of view, but we appreciate that option C would be better for the adults.
Thank you. I think what I would like, just pulling in back, the overwhelming consensus was option B. So thank you for that. But I think what we can do in the answer is also make the point that our view for young people, children and young people, that actually it should be outlawed full stop, which is and bring in some of those wider points in the comments, if that's okay. Yeah, Caroline.
Would it be relevant to put Councillor Stevenson's point about it should be illegal to sell to young people, but it should also be illegal to sell for young people? I know how difficult that would be to monitor, but we've heard this morning about adults buying for their children or groups of children, that should also be illegal in my view.
I think we can look to try to bring that through. I think I'm going to move us on because there are 27 questions. And I have promised that we will be out of this room by a certain time because of the cabinet meeting later on. So unless we're going to reconvene in the car park, we're going to have to move at a bit of pace. I don't want to curtail debate. Lisa, was there anything else from you? Because
that's the answer that I wanted, that I agreed with.
I'm going to go back to adding people in where I've got them. Councillor Scopes.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for having me. And I think this is a really important discussion. I'm glad we're having it again. I'd also just like to say thanks to the officer. I think it's Rob who drafted these responses. I think they're really solid position. I'm also really glad there's really strong consensus on the single-use vape point. And I think that's really positive for environmental reasons and obviously for young people. So that is good. I've already told my story about how I think the flavours are an issue and are targeted at children, and there's bus stops near schools where I'm a counsellor with strawberry flavours and that sort of thing. So I won't go into that again. The other question I wanted to just draw to everyone's attention is question 11. This is on page 28 of the pack. Around specialist vape shops, and whilst I understand the specialist aspect, I think my personal view is it'd be useful to have something in there around the location of specialist vape shops and near schools. So Sandy Lay's just sounds like he's agreeing with me in my ear. There's definitely specialist vape shops in Beeston near high schools, and currently there's bright colours and all that sort of stuff on the outside. And I understand we're talking about, we would support restricting them based on the draft response, and I support that as well. But I think we need to be clear that we need to be tougher on the rules if you're near a school. And I think there's a while ago there was a rule around advertising cigarettes within a certain distance of a school. So I think that would be good. The only other thing I'd just like to comment on briefly is around the other stuff we can do. And so whilst I do accept that spending loads of time on this as your scrutiny board, while the government consultation is ongoing, may not be the best use of time. I do think there's something around just keeping our partners aware of our concerns, and whether that's the enforcement agencies, our public health colleagues around, and our colleagues across the education sector, around making sure they know this is something that's on our agenda, something we want them to be enforcing wherever possible, because there's already a legal stuff around who can buy and who can't buy. And so I think there's something around trying to push that message out as a board and as a council and as an organisation, which I think we can still do with our partners and make progress during this interim time, because I do think there's a certain urgency to this, particularly for young people. So thanks for the discussion. That would be my 2 pennies worth. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Scopes. Kate.
Thank you. Sorry, I might have missed this, but is there anywhere where it talks about the possibility of putting a message actually on the vape, you know, like they did for cigarettes a while ago, where it's, you know, have I missed it somewhere, or is it there? Is it? Because I'm just wondering whether we can add something in to say where on that section around the packaging and things, to say, you know, that whether that's been considered or not.
Would that be covered at page 29, at question 13 and onwards? No?
Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah, but it's sort of talking about the imagery and the colouring, the way it's you know, it's all about sort of how it's sort of how they're branded now, or how they're, you know, sold now. And I just wondered if we can feed in somewhere where it seems appropriate a comment to say that might also be something to consider. And then the other point I was just going to make was actually just, sorry, not specifically in relation to this, but just generally in relation to what you were saying about sort of the getting the message out there about consultation. I just wondered whether you'd done anything in the leisure centres, because I'm in the leisure centres a lot. And I haven't seen anything in terms of posters or anything, but I hear anecdotally that there is vaping in the changing rooms in some of the leisure centres, which when the kids are there and, you know, exercising, and then they're going into the changing room and vaping is obviously a really awful, you know, sad occurrence. So I just thought, and there's not very long left, but if there's any way of getting anything out there to the leisure centres, it would be, I think, a good idea.
Yeah, so we have sent out a load of the vaping posters to the leisure centre, so I'm hoping they're going up on walls.
When I'm there, but I haven't seen them.
But we are looking to, you know, put on, we've got a want to know more about vaping session planned for January, which we can kind of push out to wider workforce to make them aware. And we have sort of put out, we've tried to push out lots of comms around kind of getting people to respond to this consultation, but I can link in with active Leeds and try and encourage that as well.
I'm just looking at point 12. If you disagree with the regulation point of sale displays, what alternative measures do you think the UK government and devolved administration should consider? In these, I think it should be dealt with exactly the same as cigarettes. So instead of having a display, like most vapes now are behind, you can see a lot of different coloured vapes and different things. Like cigarettes are off display, so out of sight, out of mind. So I think if they're treated the same as cigarettes, then they have to ask specifically for a particular vape, and it has to be under the counter or behind. You know, like most shops now with cigarettes, they're behind cabinets or underneath the counters. So you have to ask specifically for them.
I think maybe what we could do there is refer back to our answer to question 10, which says exactly what you're saying. Thank you for that. Councillor Stevenson.
Kate beat me to it, but I just want to expand slightly, because I was going to suggest at 13 that we go further and suggest option 3, which is plain packaging, which is the same for cigarettes. But one of the key bits, I think I mentioned this last time, that I started smoking at about 14, and I'm nervous saying that. My former head teacher at the time is in the room, so apologies for that. But one of the two things that made me stop smoking was when you could no longer do it indoors and you were outside and everyone else is inside. But the main thing was the images on the packaging. It really brought home to a lot of people the impact of what smoking was doing on your health. And I wonder whether what we should be suggesting is plain packaging, but with imaging focused on children, because we have to be really careful that obviously we don't want to put off adults vaping if we're trying to get them to vape rather than smoke. But what we need to be doing is letting children know that if you are smoking, these are the dangers. Now, quite how that happens and whether there's the relevant evidence base of the harm on children, of maybe, I don't know, stunted growth, lung problems, etc. But if we could somehow suggest plain packaging with really horrible images focused on the effects on children, that might be the key that gets to it. And on penalty, picking up on Councillor Gruen's point, I thought the same, in that I wonder if there's a way that there could be more enforcement on penalties for users. So if a police officer is walking through the streets and sees a child vaping and stops them and knows that can get their age, is there a way that then the parents could be penalised for the fact the children are either smoking or vaping? I don't know how that works within the law, but perhaps there's something around parental responsibility for what the children are doing underage, and whether there's a small fine or something might be something worth exploring.
Thank you. Councillor Heselwood.
It was just a quick question to you, where you said that you are handing out vapes to people to, through public health, to discourage them from smoking and move on to vapes. I just wanted to double check that they're not disposable vapes, because another issue with this is the environmental impact, which again, children, we're looking at children and young people, that has a big impact on their future, the environmental damage that they're doing as well. So I just want to check that as public health, we're not giving out the disposable ones to encourage people to stop smoking.
So our stop smoking service, anyone who comes through our service can opt for a vape if they wish to use that as their nicotine replacement therapy. We tend to offer rechargeables, but we don't say you can't have a disposable at all, because we do get sort of older people who have dexterity issues and they find the disposable ones are a lot easier for them to use. And so what we use is like a voucher system, and they go to our provider and they order their usually a rechargeable vape, and that gets delivered to their home, and then they can use that as part of their quitting program. But we don't tend to advertise that disposables are sort of the default option. But if someone is struggling with a rechargeable, we can sort of arrange with our provider to give them a disposable. But generally, the uptake is around rechargeables for our service users.
Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. I won't go into echoing all of the point, or I won't go into detail about all of the points which have been raised. Just to echo a lot of what colleagues have said. I think the two ones that I would just like to add, question 19, I think picking up on what Councillor Heselwood said about the environmental impact and litter picking groups, I think that's something we want to emphasise. There's an enormous amount of waste that is created by these, by the disposable ones. And also question 25 around enforcement. I think that's something we should emphasise, local authorities being given as much power as possible when it comes to the enforcement side, because also, especially in a city like Leeds, we have many different communities and the situation can change from community to community. So giving local authorities that power, giving them as much power as possible around enforcement, it means that they can respond to the needs of particular communities, but it also means that there's much greater local accountability. So if that's something that we can emphasise, I think that would be helpful. Thank you.
Councillor Bowden, I've seen your hand.
There's an element in regards to, I guess, the regulation aspect. The government has suggested nearly a full, almost like a prohibition on the tobacco sales specifically. So is there an argument to say, actually, we could possibly even go even further with the vaping? So even if we have all the restrictions that we want for this consultation, some countries are just purely doing it and recognising it purely for the benefits of quitting smoking specifically and getting people off tobacco. Is there no benefit of us in this consultation of saying that it should be through prescription only, and that would then completely limit it in regards to something that can necessarily just be sold. It would be purely done through the NHS, which other countries are looking at, which would be, I think I might be wrong on this, but it might be Australia, which are the ban on disposable vapes are coming in January, and I think it might be they're looking at a full prescription option purely for vaping. And I'd be interested to know what public health say on that, because obviously I want to hear the evidence, and it might sound good to do that, but would people be less likely to take it up if they're having to go and get it only through prescription, whereas they might be a better ease just to pick it up from a specialist shop? I'm aware of that, but I'd be interested to know what the rest of the board think on that. And I am aware that some countries are looking at purely through prescription model, and but I don't think that's an option currently that we've got on here, but I just thought I'd put it out there. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to be a bit rude. We'll let public health come back. If we try and have that discussion and debate now, well, we're not going to have that discussion and debate now because we've got other items we've got to fit in. The chances of us getting a response back on this consultation by next week are negligible, because I think we can only let this be tweaked by email. And that's a fairly, so I take the point, let's have public health come back to us and go from there.
So, yeah, you're right about the ban in Australia, and it's now prescription only. I think we've been a little bit tentative about blanket bans because it could drive that illicit market, which is already big and is growing at the moment. And so then when we put a big ban on something, it just drives that market. And we know that the illicit market is linked to much wider organised crime. So I think it's about testing what works and then gradually building it up potentially. But I can maybe do a bit more research on what's going on in Australia, what are they seeing, and how has it worked, and kind of pass that on.
Okay, final comment on this, and I do mean final comment, Councillor Manaka.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going back on question regulating point of sale displays 10 and 11. And I do appreciate that the board proposes a yes. I'm just trying to think practically in terms of the specialist shops, that how is it going to be possible for us to not, for them not to have advertising at all that is, attracting young children from that. I'm just trying, because I've done business studies at university. I'm just trying to understand the marketing side of it. How are they going to do that? And but it's just I'm possibly just wanting to put that across to the board to say, how is that going to be possible? Yes, in say for instance in supermarkets they will put e-cigarettes where they are not being seen, but how is it going to be where there are shops that are having coffee and vapes? I don't know. That's just a point, really. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that. Thanks everyone for that. I suppose, do you remember, I don't know if this, I've not seen one, the old amusement arcades where you used to have like flowers in the window, and you say, what on earth did they sell in there? And it turned out it was slot machines. I suppose it's a bit like that, isn't it? It'll be something completely unrelated in the window. Thank you, everybody, for that. We will try to capture, we won't try, we will capture all of those. We'll get the comments out by email, and so long as there is fairly broad consensus, or and we'll take silence to that regard, we'll get something off on those points. So thank you very much indeed all for that, and let's move on to item number 8, which is the Children and Families Transformation Agenda. Can we, just before we kick that off, obviously Julie's not with us because she's not well. As a board, we send her our best wishes for a full and speedy recovery. Councillor Pryor. Say again, sorry? I was going to say, you can segue wherever you like. All right, Bill.
Thank you, Chair. I'm assuming that members of the board have read the paper. I'll just quickly take you through it in outline. The directorate recognised as part of its budget considerations last year that there is required to be an investment into the capacity within the directorate to deliver some sustainable change. We therefore created a budget approval was granted to create a team that would then take that forward, and that mirrored an approach that had worked successfully in adults. During that period, up until now, we've been going through the governance issues associated with actually enacting that decision and then going through all the HR processes in terms of getting posts created and filled. One of those posts is my colleague Sandra Pentelow, who now occupies one of the senior roles in that team. What we are then trying to do realistically is map out and scope all the activity that is required to be done, and that's set out at a headline level in section 2.5 of the report. Fair to say that there are quite some chunky items in there, and so because of brevity, I've tried to keep a very headline description of that work. The board will obviously be cited on some of those pieces of work. So the SEND and the HCP work, for example, I know that we've discussed previously. There are some works in there that are, as I said, quite significant. So the SEND and the HCP work is a big major change programme. The focus in terms of children looked after is a significant and challenging piece of work because of its financial pressure and the potential benefits that it could bring in terms of changes to young people that the Directorate and the Council seeks to support. A further big piece of work around early help, which reflects the continuing desire to invest in prevention and early help to avoid worse outcomes and more costly interventions later on in the child and family's journey. Probably safe to say that it's all being supported by colleagues from across the organisation, from across the council and beyond, in particular our colleagues in the ICB, support from enabling functions such as human resources, finance and asset management. And as you would expect me to say, there is a big correlation between the financial challenges that the Directorate and indeed the council faces from the challenges within children's and families. I'll probably stop there in terms of introduction, Chair, and then pick up any specific questions that members of the board may have.
Anything from you, Jonathan, before we move to questions, colleagues? No? Right. Members of the board, comments, questions, observations? Yeah.
Hi, just on commissioning, I just noted in the report that you're looking at opportunities for closer working with adults commissioning. I just wondered how that's progressing, if you can update us in relation to that.
Yeah, of course. Some context for that, I think, is that there are significant differences between commissioning between adults and children's, and so we do need to reflect on that in terms of the nature of provision that exists and the market that exists. And there are particular pressures in children's market currently, given the external placement focus and what is generally accepted as a broken market. If you set that aside, what we are in conversations with our colleagues in adults are about improvements in terms of transitions, in terms of the transition between someone being in a children's receiving care from children's, how that then moves into care that might be provided under the Care Act by adults colleagues. Challenges on that, given the nature of provision differs and the regulatory framework is different, but we're picking up those conversations. There's a related correlation to that in terms of an all-age strategy and how we better get a strategy that reflects the journey of that child through to care provided through our colleagues in adults. There's then a separate conversation realistically about joint working, joint lessons learned, about how we leverage the resource that exists in both directorates and share across that piece. I think whilst the question specifically referenced adults, I think there's an ancillary piece of work about how which might actually be a little more significant in terms of potential benefit and outcome, and that's about how we jointly commission Better With Health colleagues, and a real strenuous look about how we do that work with ICB colleagues, because quite clearly there's a significant crossover between the ICB commissioning function and the commissioning function that we have. That again is something that we're picking up with adults, so that we're seeking to have a one council discussion with the ICB rather than a children's discussion, an adults discussion, a public health discussion.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's really important. I think that transition period is, it's a particularly important time for some of our most vulnerable children. I think sometimes it does fall down in terms of that crossover, and also in relation to transfer from children's continuing care to adult CHC. And I think that joint working from an really early stage in the pathway transition planning process would be advantageous for those young people. So I'm really encouraged to hear that you're looking into that in more detail to look at opportunities of improved working.
I'd like to make a comment about the children looked after section of the strategy. It's all about, quite rightly, resourcing, accommodation and provision of foster caring for those children. And we've had a bulge, I think, recently, haven't we? So I fully understand what motivates that. But having come freshly from the corporate parenting takeover meeting last night, I was struck particularly with a group of care leavers who were talking about their experiences. And there seems to be a very common theme of children who are looked after feeling picked out, feeling that expectations of them are coloured by the fact that they are being looked after by the council or fostered. There were stories about, being singled out at school, bullying, being labelled in various different situations, not just in schools. And I think there's a huge issue about educating various different organisations. And I would cite the police, schools, social workers. It's a huge and very important priority, I think, to try and change that whole culture. I don't know how you do that. It's a huge, broad piece of work. But when you hear stories about how the police have spoken to children who are being looked after, it's outrageous that they haven't got a better knowledge of what might have preceded being a looked after child, and what might be going on, with current foster carers or in a children's home. So whilst I really get this transformation, there's a much, much, much deeper transformation that needs to take place with that particular group.
Chair, what I'll probably do is ask Farah to reply to some of the specifics on that. What I would say is that the report realistically is trying to bring a snapshot of the transformation activity that is in scope and is part of that formal process. There's a whole series of work that underpins that across the directorate, and one of those important pieces of underpinning work is our social work practice. And if Julie would hear, Julie would be saying to you, actually, if we make sure that our practice is right, the processes and the change and the savings flow from that. So I think it's a point very well made, but probably Farah can pick up in terms of some of the detail on that.
And just to make the wider point, it's an important point made, but I think it's also important we focus on specifically this specific agenda item as well, because I'm anxious if we broaden it out, we can tackle everything within the directorate. So I think it's really important we try to focus on what these items are specifically around the managing of the overspend, etc., and how we deliver that better going forward.
I think the culture and experiences of care leavers, and when we're focusing on looked after children, they become care leavers, is really important. And it still saddens me that we've got locally those messages, but also nationally. There are lots of examples of good practice, and those are the bits we want to build on. We have our care leavers hub now at Archway, working with teams specifically around, firstly, the service delivery for our care leavers, and keeping them close, connected with Leeds services, but really championing their needs. but also working closely around the culture and how people work with care leavers. And that's a really important drive for us. So the voices of voice and influence, people will know we have a strong voice and influence team, and part of their work is about practitioners understanding the messages from children and families, and that includes our care leavers, but also the work with our wider partners, because you're right, it's not just social workers that work with care leavers, it is the wider partnership and access to those services, but really understanding what it means. So that work is on the way, but it will always be a piece of work that needs doing, because obviously in police, in social care, in health, in other organisations, there's a turnover of staff as well. So that's ongoing. The voice and influence is a key part of ongoing work, of the work that we're doing ongoing, and care leavers is a priority in that. This piece of work, as Phil says, is focused on the areas we need to transform to bring those looked after children closer to home, to be able to care for children ourselves, so they're not spending time in external organisations where they're further disadvantaged when they do become care leavers.
Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. I'm very mindful of what you said in your previous comments. So I would just back up what Councillor Gruen said, though, and I think when it comes to interactions with children who are looked after, I think having training as much as possible for staff in a variety of settings. I would add others apart from the police as well. I think that was a very clear theme that was coming out. And actually, in terms of the delivery of services, I think if we can get that right, we'll get quite a lot of other things right. And in the long term, there are savings there as well. If we deliver services more effectively, there are significant savings to be made there. If we're looking at this purely from a financial point of view, but obviously the voice of the young people is very important. So if that can be a priority, I would second what Councillor Gruen said.
John, are you wanting to come in?
Yeah, in regarding to the children looked after, a number of times in children families scrutiny, we have talked about sort of the market for this as well, especially with the private organisations and the overcharging and the profit margin. So it's really, really great to see about these 8 additional places that we're creating to make sure these children are more, I guess, in-house, and the savings that will come and come with that. We sort of spoke about fostering previously as well, because again, we're aware the sort of private organisations. I looked it up last time. I think if we have a fosterer that isn't with the authority, they can actually make around double to what they can, although we offer far more support. I can see on what we've said, though, fostering work is underway around enhancing the council's offer to foster carers. Is that with additional help, or is that suggesting another sort of uptick in pay as well? Because is there an argument to suggest that whilst we're paying more money, we might be able to get more fosterers in-house rather than working for these companies where there are really large profit margins? Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Bowden. The reality is that fostering, as you set out, is a complicated picture. I think the work that we're doing in this and the team are trying to support is absolutely trying to get to a mixed position on this. So what we're taking forward and what the service is taking forward and are being supported to do is effectively some work that says, where do we have the right in-house resource to look after children with some of the most complex needs? So that then is about a targeted approach to fosterers and support training that enables them to look after children with those complex needs. There's a secondary piece of work that then says, well, if that works, is there then some sort of matching process that could be done in terms of capacity that could be delivered? There's a piece of work around actually improving our identification, our recruitment, our reducing our attrition rate between people who are interested and then actually become foster carers. There is a piece of work that continues to look at the remuneration that's provided to foster carers and there will be something that comes to executive board in relation to that in terms of uplifts. There's then a whole series of relatively specialised work that we might be doing in terms of work that's aimed at particular cohorts. So again, it's one of those big areas of work, and it's one of those areas where Farah and I have just spoken this morning about we need to probably bring in some additional capacities to try to support that work to enable us to make some of the changes that need making. At the heart of that, though, is absolutely that will be driven by the service, who are our subject matter experts in fostering, who have the knowledge and the experience of our current cohort. And you know, I think most people, everyone in the directorate would recognise the challenge that you've put in relation to independent fostering agencies versus the council's in-house facility, and that's something that we'd obviously want to continue to increase the level of in-house provision and in-house take-up for a whole variety of reasons.
Thank you for that. I have Councillor Seary, then Jackie.
Thank you, Chair. Just about the legal implications, we've 96% of tribunals are won by parents against the council. We heard that at the working group, and that's a legal implication in itself. But I'm aware of a number of tribunal wins that still haven't got their EHCPs, sorry, Chair, adhered to, and that's a legal implication as well. I may have missed it, Chair, but there's nothing in this report that suggests that that's going to be looked into as well.
So Chair, I haven't attempted in this paper to bring out the legal, financial, reputational risks associated with all elements of the programme. It's an integral element of efficient and effective programme management that those risks are considered, reduced and mitigated where possible. Members will be aware that there's a piece of work specifically on EHCPs. There is a paper that will be going to the next executive board that sets out a follow-up paper to the paper that went in October that set out the as-is. That paper sets out what the 2B will look like, and that work is continuing. An absolute integral element of that is that the council moves as quickly as it possibly can to a position of full legal compliance. That's spelt out in that paper. It's spelt out in the work that's being done in relation to the redesign that, as you know, is being supported by externally for some independent check and challenge on that. Colleagues from legal services are involved in that steering group. So we recognise the challenge on EHCPs. We recognise that improvements have to be made, and there is a process in place to get those improvements delivered as soon as we possibly can.
I think as a board, it would be quite useful if actually we could have a figure around the tribunal costs.
I can endeavour to get that for you, Chair. I would say that after the working group meeting last week, was it last week? The week seemed to go by so quick. I checked the 96% is a national figure, not a Leeds specific figure, but I will go out and I'll get some further information on tribunal costs. And I'll also try to get a figure on Leeds tribunal appeal cases as well.
Be really helpful. Thank you. Jackie, I think this might be our last one on this.
Right, this one relevant to transport. I know I've been involved with 2 inquiries in relation to transport, and this is coming up again. Has anything changed since the last inquiry and the recommendations that were given by us previously in the last inquiry?
I would probably say I don't have any specifics on that particular point, Chair, but if I can take that away and provide a written response, I'll happily do that. The transport review, which is being refreshed given significant new challenges that absolutely relate back to the EHCP process and the increasing numbers of EHCPs, but I haven't got those specifics to hand, but I'll endeavour to provide that back to the board.
Thank you. Anybody else before we? Yeah.
Sorry, just a quick one. Under the heading "Turning the Curve," I know that's an expression that we hear a lot, and obviously an approach of children's services in terms of early intervention. It says this activity is currently subject to revised scoping exercise. Are you able to tell us a bit more about that, or bring some more information to the board about that in due course?
Absolutely, Chair. We can bring something back if that's the board's request. I think the position at the moment currently is that there's lots of work that's being undertaken, but what we wanted to do is try to get that written down, popped into a project plan, so it's got some cognizance to it, and we can see the start, middle, and end. And so I think it is very much about the fact that work is in hand. It just needs putting into a program methodology in a way that then is able to be linked to other areas of activity, but we can sort that out for sure.
Thank you, and thanks everybody for the contributions. It's clear this is a major piece of work. All of us know, because we can see the reports that come out, that as a directorate, it's a major contributor to the projected overspend. So trying to get a proper handle, that suggests it wasn't previous, an even tighter handle across how that's coming about year after year will be really, really helpful. So more power to your elbow. Okay, thank you everybody. Moving on then to item 9. We okay to press on, or do you want 2-3 minute comfort break? Comfort break for okay. We're making good time, so give a couple of minutes. Is it really still? It looks like the screen had frozen. Thank you, everybody. We are at agenda item 9, page 43 of the pack. The refreshed 3A's strategy. Councillor Pryor, do you want to say anything to kick us off?
Yes, very briefly. So the 3A strategy we first launched in 2018. So quite a few years ago now. Obviously, it looks at attendance, attainment, and achievement to try and improve all these for children across Leeds. Post-COVID in 2021, we had a reevaluation of this. Obviously, the landscape around education had changed quite dramatically then. I think it's fair to say from a lot of conversations with head teachers, I think schools are still living in a post-COVID world. We're still seeing the effects from it quite significantly. I think most notably around children with SEND and an increased need across the board. But we've moved on from that immediate post-COVID atmosphere into probably what is longer term. So this is a refresh of the strategy from 24 to 26. I would leave it there in terms of context and pass on to Kath.
Thank you, Councillor Pryor. Just as Councillor Pryor has reminded people that this is a strategy that the council have used, and to really just to remind people, or to something we're constantly having to reiterate, and particularly we reiterate it to schools, is it's a service delivery. So it's using existing resources to support our schools. This particular plan of moving it forward and not calling it the refresh, revisited and things, just saying this is the plan for those years ahead, has come about following consultation, extensive consultation with academic leaders last year, right through the academic year, and very much taking on board what they are saying their priorities are, and also reviewing the impact of the previous plans, which had previously been reported to Scrutiny, the latest in March 2023. So as I said, it is our delivery plan. It's not a list of actions for schools to deliver, which I think when we first launched this back in 2018, and at that time I was a school leader, I think there was a confusion of going, is this what we've got to do? And so I think we're much clearer about that. And I think school leaders are, and we very much communicated that this is our plan of using the resources that we do have to support them with their priorities. So you'll have seen through the plan, they are very similar priorities before, but as I say, they have responded to educational settings, concerns. Things that have come up time and time again, obviously, are things like the rising need for speech, language and communication support, and the burgeoning need we have as a city to prioritise needs and positive engagement. So as we move ahead, our 16-year-olds moving into that next phase, to make sure that with those rising numbers we've got, that we have got sufficiency and that we have got them engaged. So that's further strengthened. As Councillor Pryor mentioned, the widening the focus of actions on special educational needs and disabilities, and then specific action on supporting schools with the challenges they currently have around violence, gang violence, knife crime, etc. So the priorities are pretty much the same, but with feedback and with a review of our local, regional and national priorities, they are slightly reshaped. And we have reshaped some of the presentation of them so that we can see the short-term aims, but also the longer-term intended impact, because it is that longer-term plan that will move ahead as well. So if I leave it there and open for questions.
I just wanted to ask about action 5, where it says secondary schools to be offered key stage 3 reading reviews. Just this is in light of, I meet regularly with some old colleagues who are grandparents, and a couple of them have encountered children who are now parents, children they taught who are now parents, who are not able to read. But when they left primary school, they could read, probably below, well, it was below what would be now called the expected level, but they could still decode and had a level of understanding, comprehension. Is that because what I'm wondering is, once you get to high school, it's very much about, even later in primary school, but it's very much about those higher level reading skills. And will there be a part of this action 5 to make sure that although those children may not even get the level 4 or 5 in GCSE, it still increases their chances if they leave high school being able to read, to get a job and to succeed at level in society.
Yes, certainly that is certainly part of it, that functional literacy, that maintaining that for all children wherever possible. There certainly is a focus at Key Stage 3 on ensuring that literacy in all its forms, reading from decoding through to those high level reading skills that you mentioned, are still developed. And I think the offer from the service, from the Learning Improvement Service, is to support that and do a review. Schools are very much focusing on that. There is an Ofsted focus on it as well, even to the point, to take your point, that an Ofsted inspector will ask children to read aloud to them to see whether they still have that fluency. So there is very much a focus, and this reading review takes right across that to look at the strategies they're using. How high profile is it? How is it stretched across the curriculum, not just within English lessons, etc. So anything else you want to add?
No, I think you're right there, Catherine. I think there's an awful lot of work that we can see as we're sort of visiting schools, and our teams of really good work that schools and academies are putting in place to support the reading agenda at Key Stage 3, Key Stage 2 and Key Stage 3. I guess this is us tapping into that. How do we support school leaders to continue that work to ensure that literacy and reading is really effective with all the way through their secondary school experience?
It's if they don't get that good level at GCSE, that there is sometimes a tendency for those children to be overlooked. So I really welcome this, and just for those children still be able to maintain and then progress, despite the fact that they may not get that level 4 or 5 in English.
Thank you. Were you wanting to come back on that stuff? No? Okay, thank you. Tony, I've got Tony, I'll add you onto the list.
One of the key elements of this policy was, when it first started, attendance. And if I'd like to refer to priority 5, ensure all young people in Leeds participate in education. We did have an inquiry some time ago, before COVID, as to the fact that the suspension levels in Leeds were quite high. I learned from the Yorkshire Evening Post, which I get at 6 o'clock in the morning, that in actual fact, suspensions in Leeds are now at an all-time high. If we can't keep kids in school, how are we going to make sure that priority 5 is enforced? What's happening about this situation, about suspensions in schools?
I think that across the service and across schools, educational leaders and across the service, people share your concern about the rising rate of suspensions. I think it reflects a national picture of challenge in all schools, and that challenge of children being more complex, more troubled, and us finding it increasingly challenging to engage them. So I think the service is very much concerned with the same issues that you are. There are many things across the service that are working towards that. Some of those do fit into priority 2 around the attendance, and certainly into priority 5 around engagement as well. But certainly we have a service that work on our vulnerable learners. We have our area inclusion partnerships who sit together as educational leaders and try and look, how can we better support our children? The services that work across with more complex children who present social, emotional, mental health challenges. We work support schools with individual children to try and see if we can re-engage them. The national picture from the DfE, the Department for Education, is very much that there are times they are supportive of children being suspended from school and indeed even permanently excluded. Leeds, as you know, has always worked to avoid that and to try and include children as much as possible. And we're still, our education leaders are still firmly committed to that with ourselves. But it is an increasing challenge to look at suspensions and suspension rates in different schools and support them where they are meeting challenges where they feel that suspension, short-term suspension, is their only route of redress at the moment, and we are working with educational leaders on that.
The fact is, though, it's not getting better, it's getting worse. Which is the big worry to me.
Yeah, I suppose kind of children missing education through being absent or having a fixed term exclusion, I think they're quite separate issues, although they both have the same outcome of children missing education. So it's probably worth looking at them in quite separate ways. I think it was before COVID that obviously this board had the inquiry, the full inquiry into off-rolling, fixed-term exclusions and kind of the uses of different punishments in schools, which I do think is slightly different from this topic, although obviously it does have the same link with children missing from education. There was a bit of a slowing down of that post-COVID, but it could be worth this board looking at that issue again to see kind of where we're up to a few years on. I'm really proud that Leeds does have one of the lowest rates of permanent exclusion in the country. I think at one point we were the lowest. I'm not sure where we are now, but we're still one of the lowest. But obviously that's quite a separate issue from fixed term exclusions, which you're raising now. But it is probably worth looking at that aspect in detail because it does deviate slightly from this paper.
Thanks, Jonathan. Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. Looking at page 45, priority 2, 7.2. So 2 questions. So action 1, regarding a link attendance officer. How many schools would this person be responsible for? And would they be working citywide? Would they be working in particular parts of the city? It'd be helpful to know a little bit more about that. Establishing significant absence panels. Again, how many of these would there be? Who would they be comprised of? What sorts of people would be on there? What would their background be? So it'd be helpful to have a little bit more detail about action 1 and 2. And then I've got another point, but on a separate one. I'll let you answer that first.
So in terms of the numbers of schools, I haven't got that exact detail, apologies, but we can report that to the board. We tend to work regionally, so within wedges or clusters, and they would be allocated in that way. So they would develop those relationships with those same schools. And the same would happen with the significant absence panel, that whilst that would be a citywide, like we already have social, emotional, mental health panels and so on, it would work on that same premise, but people would bring their cases to that panel. And we can certainly give you more detail about that and give you a further report, which I think can be included perhaps with the update from attendance that will come to another scrutiny board, if that helps.
That would be very helpful, yes. And I think we'd all want to know about that as ward members, because this is clearly a priority. The other thing I was going to ask about 7.4 and 7.5. So with the corporate parenting board hat on, so I don't see any specific mention here to children in care and also care leavers. But I would just urge that that's something I know that there is a lot of work that's being done, but I would just put on record that there are some quite specific issues there. Councillor Gruen and I were at the takeover last night, and I mean some of the statistics are quite shocking. And from My Health, My School, I mean, for example, young people who've been bullied in the last year. Young people in care, 68% reported that at secondary level, compared with 35% for those who are not. I mean, I won't go through all of the figures, and people will be familiar with that, but I do think there are some quite specific needs there, and we all need to be very mindful of those.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, I would agree. And perhaps that would be helpful when we're reporting the impact, that we take that specific lens as well of the impact on children looked after and care leavers. And thank you for that.
Can I just also add into that as well, that I guess the strategy under each of the priorities, we would expect different teams. So it's about harnessing all of the teams that sit within the directorate. So the children looked after teams, virtual school, they would, as feeding up into that plan, part of the responsibility of the people who have got responsibility for each of those areas is to make sure that everybody that we've got available is contributing to making the impact. So I think Kath's right that we can actually feed that in, because that would be part of that whole process. But you're right, there's some really important groups that we can report on and identify.
Thank you for that. Councillor Renshaw.
Thank you, Chair. I'm quite concerned about 7.4, priority 4. It does mention all people feeling safe in schools, and I don't think that is always the case. It's had different forms of feeling unsafe for a number of years, but when it gets to like action 4, which is support school leaders in dealing with knife crime in their settings, I just wondered what reasons there were for that, whether any research has been done into looking at that issue, and is that some of the reasons why children are refusing to go to school, and more parents wanting their children to do work from home. So I just wondered if you'd any responses to why there was an increase in number in those working from home. And I suppose it links with priority 5, 7.6. And I do agree with some of the comments that were passed earlier, where children tend to feel that they're not real, it's no longer a place for them. And so because they're not one of the targets and the top people, they don't necessarily have a very high self-esteem, and they just feel, well, what's the point? What's the point of me coming to school? So I just wondered if you got any more accurate figures regarding the NEET and the not in education, employment or training figures, and whether or not that had increased or decreased over a number of years that I've been sitting on this board, because it's something that's been consistently addressed and yet never improved in any way. So I just wondered if you could help me with that one.
I'll just start with an update on kind of what we're doing about knife crime, if that's okay, because it is a hugely challenging and a concerning issue in our city, as it is in many core cities. We're working closely with our colleagues in Safer Leeds, with police colleagues, with communities around looking at identifying young people earlier at risk, picking up patterns, groups of young people, so we started off in the east of the city, where kind of something emerged quite organically, locality meetings, and that involved school colleagues, police colleagues who were in the localities, third sector and services, and developed into locality meetings where people were able to share information about emerging pictures and risks, and then be able to have a targeted response. Jointly with our Safer Leeds colleagues, we've expanded that to the 3 areas of the city, and the work continues with police. Unfortunately, gangs are intelligent. They move at a pace that we often don't. There's a clear link between youth violence and gang affiliation, and I think that we are fortunate in Leeds with the community. So we've got, and the community support we've got from community leaders and schools and our partnership, where we are working together on identifying and tackling that. Some of it is awareness and diversion for young people away from youth violence, away from gangs, and then the other part is targeting those who exploit children. So I just want to reassure you that that work is continuing. Sadly, we continue to see injuries, deaths because of youth violence, because of knife crime. But that work is targeted, and obviously schools are the hubs of communities, and so that's why that's in there. It's important to recognise emerging challenges that schools are facing.
Thanks, Fran. Just as well. I mean, we're really lucky out in Leeds in terms of having some brilliant schools and academies and settings that actually where obviously the majority of our kids do feel safe and they're happy to come to school. I think sadly, it's this gang crime and knife crime is becoming more of a prevalent issue around the city and also nationally. Like Farah said, we've got a number of initiatives. We've got good links with the police, with West Yorkshire Police. That process has started already in terms of linking in with school leaders to support them. So there's been sessions with secondary leaders at their secondary forum. Next week, the Chief Inspector from West Yorkshire Police is coming to talk with the primary school forum, and to start talking about the whole issue of knife and gang crime in schools and how schools, the police, local authorities work together to support schools in supporting communities and supporting young people. So I think there's a lot of work to do. There's a lot of resources there that schools can tap into. How do we develop those? How do we signpost those to school leaders? What support networks are available for them? But it's important that we do that. There's been the police have developed, for example, is it called PIP? The PIP, so like a police information portal where schools and settings are now encouraged to report intelligence around any gang incidents within their school. It could be sort of quite minor things, but actually as a picture, the police can build up. So there's a number of things that are taking place. Some of our teams, I'm not necessarily involved in that, but are dealing with like the Safer project in parts of the city, part of the DFE project, working with police, school communities and the local authority in how to manage and tackle these sorts of issues. And hopefully from the feedback from that will be rolled out more citywide as well and more nationally as well. So I think it's a worrying problem, but I think that's why I think we were keen that became part of the refresh 3 years, because it is a growing concern for school leaders of keeping their young people safe in their communities.
Can I sorry.
Just really to add to that, to say how it's important. This is part of our 3A strategy. It is something that school leaders are really having to grapple with at the moment. We know that as poverty increases in the country, we have seen kind of the rise of gangs increasing. It's people looking for a sense of belonging. It's happening not just in Leeds, but across the country. And schools are dealing with, I think we have to remember that a young person spends around 17% of their time in school. And actually it's what happens in that other 83% of the time that has a huge impact on that child's life. It has a huge impact on what gets brought into the school. And actually, that's why it's so important to work with communities, work with the police, ensure that there's youth work. And I think it just shows it's the whole picture. It's of what is going on in that young person's life that takes them down this path. And schools, sadly, are just kind of dealing with the symptoms of some of these things.
Can I just ask? I think it's sort of a unanswerable question, but it's like, are children taking knives to school for their own self-defense, or are they taking knives to school for other reasons as part of a gang? So there's children who are having knives on them, but it's mainly because they're frightened. So they feel that they need to take that knife with them or some form of defence in order to feel safe. And I just wondered if there are any ways that we could tackle that within our schools, and are all academies taking part in the projects that you're doing throughout the whole of Leeds?
So to answer that last bit, yes, this is a citywide complete commitment to, and the support that the service offers is across all schools and academies and all settings. To answer the question about children carrying knives and things, there are really consistent educational programs about the dangers of that, and if you know, and that is happening in all our schools, and the work that Dave was referring to with the police and the support they're giving. So there are quite clear educational programs to avoid exactly that situation where children think that is what they would need to do. I think I would also remind the board that our schools develop superb relationships with their children, and our children are safest if they flourish in an open and safe relationship in their school, because there are adults that they can refer to. So that's how you get that information and that softer intelligence about the possibility there'll be children that think that they need to do that. So there are a lot of ways that people are working with them, and we work across the services to support those children that think that might be necessary, and that goes right across the city. And is that.
We just pick up, sorry, Karen, you raised another question that we've not really spoken to at all, which was the question around NEETs and the fact that while you've been on the board, actually it doesn't, if anything, the picture's got worse. So can you just speak to that aspect as well of the question?
That was what I was going to pick up. So 100% agree, and that's why it still remains a priority, because the challenge of engaging children who are reaching the end of compulsory school age doesn't go away. And I think the reasons why that's challenging are changing year on year. From when I was a head, that was my priority. I was a head of a school, whereas actually as a certain councillor who I think still owes me a detention for that smoking. So just I'll see you afterwards, councillor. But as a head, that was our priority, was to try and track down every single child, and the reasons for that lack of engagement, I think, have changed year on year on year. So that's not me being defeatist about it from the service helping schools make that a priority, but the reasons for that lack of engagement keep changing, and that certainly is part of the reason why Leeds figures do not still look good on that. So it remains absolutely a priority to support schools and to look and see what resources can we garner, and also to look across other local authorities. How are they doing it? How is it different? And looking across other core cities, what's happening there. So that remains an absolute key priority. That every year there's a whole other across the country, 500, 600,000 non-compulsory school age leavers who have to be engaged, and every year the challenges of those changes, and I think that's why it remains there. And we as a service are trying to remain responsive to what the challenges are. I think the post-COVID challenges have very much changed. Changes with the outcomes data will change it again this year from the last couple of years, where data was outcomes data was slightly different and assessed differently, through to the current cohort. We have the additional challenge of higher numbers coming in the next several years that we've got, and the service is working actively with schools on looking at how they can offer, can they broaden their offer, can we look at particular cohorts of children who'll be those most likely not to engage if we let them slip through the net.
Just, I'm going to have to move us on just a little, sorry. Just so everybody knows who I've got down on the list to speak so far. I have Councillor Gruen next, then Councillor Heatherwood, I've got Kate, got Councillor Downs, I've got Councillor Monaco. That's who I have so far. Is there anybody else while I'm looking? Okay, so Councillor Gruen, thank you.
Thank you. I enjoyed reading this, and I think the priorities are the right priorities that have been identified. I can see how each priority aligns with the issues that have emerged from COVID, which we now look at as almost long term, but we've got a whole cohort in our schools of children who missed out from school and didn't particularly have any sort of routine expectation or drive, and now they've come back to school, they are behaving in very different ways, different learning ways and everything. And I can see how these priorities are designed to move us on from that point. But I do find the actions underneath the attendance one, which is a major issue for us, to be a bit punitive. I mean, I'm sure we need them. I'm sure we need them. But I'm not convinced that those alone will change the attendance pattern. I think, you know, perhaps what the whole document lacks to me is the sort of statement of aspiration of the kind of outcomes that we're now expecting. And perhaps we've moved to a point, you made comments earlier on about how the outcomes are differently assessed now, and we're looking at a different framework. Are we in a position, do you think, now to start to recognise and value and inspire the full range of attainment, not just exam results? Because I think what will make a difference to attendance, particularly in the secondary curriculum, is if we can begin to look at ways of delivering it that are significantly different, that will engage the young people we now have in those schools. First-hand experience, you know, things that will really engage them. I've mentioned before that I have seen groups of children or young people in our secondary schools behaving very, very differently when they're immersed in a different activity. And maybe we need to move closer to that within the delivery of the curriculum. We still deliver a very conventional secondary curriculum, don't we? However well we do it, it's still fairly conventional. I really think we need something in here about changing those ways of teaching and learning and the process of how to absorb a teenager whose life has been a bit disrupted.
I mean, I hear what you're saying, Councillor Gruen, in terms of, you know, how curriculum is delivered, and actually when curriculums are imaginative and innovative, kids engage in that. There's a huge amount of great work taking place in schools and academies right across the city to engage young people and to adapt curriculum to the needs, you know, and we've seen that sort of like, you know, where they've adapted to fit the needs of those kids that have had those challenges. I think this plan in particular, so I guess governing board, trust boards, school leaders are responsible for implementing their curriculum and how they deliver that curriculum within their setting. We can influence and shape, but actually this plan isn't about how we deliver the curriculum, because it's for the schools and academies to deliver their curriculum. This is about how we best support the resource that we have. How do we best support that? And we can do that through, you know, for example, in our 11 to 19 team, we've got sort of our LLP networks where curriculum leaders from each of the 13 subjects come together. They share good practice. They meet at each other's schools, and it's that type of thing that I think the local authority can do in terms of sharing practice.
And I think one area in particular that the service has developed, and I think it appears elsewhere in the plan, is the SEND curriculum review. So actually looking for those children who find it hardest to access the curriculum, the service offers a review that they do jointly with leaders to train those leaders to skill them up in that assessment of looking through the lens of a child with additional needs and saying, how have we got the access for them right? Because if they can access the curriculum, they can achieve success, even if it is in a traditional formal teaching way or something, but they can achieve more success. So I think that is having an impact on schools of saying, how does this curriculum you have forged, what is the impact of that on a child with additional needs who perhaps would find it more challenging?
Worth just on Kath mentioned the SEN curriculum review, which teams, learning improvement colleagues and learning inclusion teams have worked together on to develop that, to utilise in schools, done it as a pilot with a number of schools. It's been really well received by the school leaders to see how they can develop their curriculum for those individual young people and for the cohorts. And I think there's sort of some links coming on in terms of it being such good quality that I think there's talks with like some of the research university aspects of that, of how we could use that to sort of make that an even more sort of impactful project. And we'll roll that out more. So our primary team are starting to utilise that within their offer to schools to look at the curriculum for the primary as well. So some positives there.
I'm sure there are, and I'm sure you're doing lots of good work. And I hear everything you've said about special educational needs groups and so on. I still feel that all children now have a broader range of needs than they perhaps did 4 or 5 years ago, and we need to grow to address those. And the challenge I would offer you is that I think even though many of our schools are academies, and you'll quite rightly say it's up to them to design their curriculum and deliver it appropriately, I still feel a local authority, council, has a role of inspiring good practice.
Challenge accepted, Councillor Graham.
Thank you for that. Councillor Heselwood.
Yeah, thank you. You were also my English teacher when you first started teaching. Yes, yeah.
Councillor Heselwood, you're not helping today.
I never smoked, and I don't believe I owe any detentions. So that's why I'm on this side. That's not why I put my hand up to speak, but after you mentioned that, I had to say that. But you taught me some very good First World War poetry. I remember that. That sticks in my mind. I remember it. Thank you.
We're going to be monitoring sticky learning in a minute, aren't we?
My point was just on priority 5 with the NEET young people. Last September and this September, I got chased quite a bit last September for my own son, who went to Abbey Grange and is now over the road at Leeds College of Art, who's been there, is now in year 13. So he's been there for 2 years, his second year. But I've been chased both years wanting to know where my son is, and is he in full-time education? Where is he? And last year, when he made the transition from high school into art college, I got a few messages about it, which was quite strange. Probably 2 or 3. So I just wonder, although I accept what people are saying about, is this being addressed? I just wonder if we've got some people where we haven't got the data, where we've got people on that list like my son who is in full-time education. So it's just from my own experience, just something for us to pick up on, that, it's not always what it looks like. Yeah.
We'll bring Councillor Pryor in first, if that's okay.
Yeah, just to broadly confirm that the largest element of NEET is actually the not known element. So you say they may well be in education, but sometimes it's struggling to get that information. I know that NEET does sit under the Infrastructure Scrutiny Board, and it is a piece of work that because I attend that one as well to give evidence, and it is something we discuss quite a lot on that one, just to avoid duplication.
So just before you come in, Kath, just to pick up an interesting, I think it's interesting point on that, is actually we sometimes send text messages to parents, carers, and I've had one recently finding out where Rachel was, who's my oldest, and I actually didn't reply to it because actually I'm not quite sure who the text message is from. It's quite generic in that you've got, where is your such and such, your recent schooling, or something like that. And actually, I'm really not sure that in this day and age of ever more elaborate phishing exercises, that's really how we should be communicating, because it just looked fraudulent to me. Now, knowing what I know, it probably wasn't, but I'm really not sure we should be trying to get that information that way necessarily.
Thank you. We will certainly feed that back. And thank you, Councillor. You don't owe me a detention, by the way.
This board's taking a real strange turn. Okay, thank you very much. Kate.
Thank you. I think obviously there's a really strong link, isn't there, between priority 2 and priority 4, because for me, the issues around attendance in many ways, behaviours in school which challenge and lead to exclusions are often as a result of unmet need. And, essentially, I think if children feel their needs are met, that they're safe and, their well-being is looked after, there's more of a likelihood that they're going to attend school. And I think, we know and we've talked about it a lot at this board, that there is an issue in terms of the availability of support for children and young people, particularly off the back of the pandemic, from more specialist services, and obviously a lot of children that still need those services. And so it's encouraging to see that under priority 7.4, linking in with colleagues in health and social work, social care. But I think schools could be supported more, and obviously that's set out under priority 7.4 around developing a whole school approach to wellbeing. So I know there's DfE guidance around this, which was updated on the 10th, I think it was, of November. And I'm not sure to what extent this report has had the opportunity to take into consideration any updates within that document. But I think, there's that to me is the absolute crux of this, that, if schools are really supported to have a really effective whole school approach to wellbeing, that will sit behind, and underpin the work that's also being done in terms of improving attendance and looking at ways of improving capacity in terms of the educational psychology, the counselling services, the other cluster services that support schools to really bolster the wellbeing side. And I agree with what Councillor Groom was saying, that obviously we've got a lot of children with SEND, and more so now than we did before, but we've also got a whole cohort of children who, have the baggage from the pandemic and who essentially need holding in a way that children have always needed, but even more so now, that might not fit the criteria of SEND, but certainly who have needs that really need to be as well supported as they can be within school. So I think that whole school approach, if we can look at how we can ensure that our schools are putting that into place. I remember when obviously I'm not a governor anymore, but when I was a governor, looking at this, and at the time, I think, things obviously probably moved on a bit now, but at the time it was sort of, I think, they weren't really sure how they were going to approach that. And I remember we've talked at the board as well before about services like Mind May. I haven't really heard anything about that for some time. So I think if we could maybe think about how we could sort of expand 7.4 and just add in maybe about that whole school approach, that to me that feels like it's missing, that would make a difference. And also just under action 4, sorry, just going back to the gang related violence and knife crime, I think we obviously know that often, not always, it's related to drugs, and I noticed that there's not any mention of drugs or county lines, but I think that's really relevant, particularly for a city. And maybe we need to feed in something there about that as well, to ensure that is being considered, by school leaders when they're looking at gang related violence and knife crime, and the role that drugs and county lines has to play in relation to that as well. So that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Brilliant. Yeah, with everything, I would agree with that in terms of where, all the things that you're saying about that. I think we can certainly look at how we, because I think from what we see from our discussions with school leaders and academy leaders, there's lots of work around sort of schools putting whole approaches to wellbeing for their young people and for their staff, from governors and school leaders. So I think that's something that we can thread in, because we would agree with that. I think one of the key things is the gateway that I think it's mentioned here about the action 1 on the priority 4 is about the online gateway, which I think we've launched as a pilot at the moment for school leaders and for schools. And that's pretty much a combination. What we've tried to do is bring all the different teams, for example, the school's wellbeing team, health and safety, learning teams, ed psych teams together so that school leaders and schools can hit the wellbeing gateway site. They've got all the resources there, all the signposts to all the different resources that are available to them. And I think that's, we launched that at our primary away day, and that's coming online for real after feedback from primary leaders and secondary leaders in January. So I think that'll be a really useful resource. And I think it's a really good step forward to bring some of that wellbeing agenda together, because there's so many aspects to that. Just on it's probably worth just saying, One of the things that we're very keen to do is try as a local authority to support school leaders, because that's the nub of getting that whole school approach to it. We had our primary away day with a focus on leader wellbeing. We had 140 leaders at Headingley, and I was going to say Ellen Road then, but Headingley, which was really a really good day just to get focused on. Councillor Pryor came, we had the real David Cameron, we had Alistair Campbell talking about wellbeing and his wellbeing journey. So it was a really useful and effective day to start that whole discussion with school leaders about wellbeing in that for themselves and also for their schools. In terms of, I think you're right, in terms of we've got Action 4 there with gang-related violence and life crime. I think the county lines, we can look at that and sort of like how we draft that wider context into the problems that are linked with that as well.
Sorry, some people might have thought, I'll bring back, who's the real David Cameron? Sorry.
The real David Cameron isn't the David Cameron. He's a Scottish educational leader, but very funny, talks, but it was quite interesting that we had Alistair Campbell and the real David Cameron.
I'll, yeah. The other, perhaps. Okay, thank you. Yeah, absolutely, please.
Sorry, just to come back really quickly. Thank you. That's really encouraging and helpful. And I think just thinking about it in terms of all those different things, I think if schools have a really clear wellbeing policy in place, then it's great that you've got the effective online gateway platform for staff, but staff need to know how and when they access that, how, in individual cases, how that sits in with the policy or the system within the school, and also in terms of, using the feedback from the My Health, My Wellbeing, how are they going to improve wellbeing? They just should, in my view, all have a really, really clear, detailed wellbeing policy that builds in all of this to ensure that you actually do improve outcomes for children in practice, using all of the different support and services that are available, and being so staff are really clear about their roles and responsibilities within that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Downs.
Thank you, Chair. One really good document here. Can support all of it. The one comment that I would make that appears to be missing from my point of view, but that is, I was going to mention about the knife crime, and that's all been dealt with. However, below knife crime, there are other things as well. Grooming, exploitation, bullying and cyberbullying, which can also lead to mental health issues. And doesn't seem to be covered here at all. And I would have thought that can have a very serious impact on a young person's learning experience. I certainly had an issue with one of my daughters being bullied at school, and the school handled it perfectly and it got resolved and her education was turned around because of that. But there doesn't seem to be any sort of policy or steering here to look at those issues. I may have missed it, but I'm just wondering whether if it isn't in there, whether it's worth putting in, because I think it has a big impact. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We certainly would review that. I think what's in here are almost like the new ones. So even the county lines is something that schools are much more experienced at supporting and have done. There's been a lot of training on recognising the signs of it, etc. Certainly post-pandemic, and the same would be true of bullying. Schools have got really, really clear bullying policies. It's great to hear that one of those has had an impact on a real lived experience. So I think all of those things still happen, and we still have resources that work to support those. What you've got in the plan are like the things that leaders have said we really need additional support with, because they're things that we already can access and we know how to get behind that. All of those that you've mentioned are absolutely crucial for children's wellbeing and them thriving in schools. But they are probably things that schools are much more skilled with and that are embedded. And this is to look at, leaders said we want more support around these things, right? Let's see what we can get behind them to support them with it. But we can certainly flag that up and make sure that there is still a focus on that.
And just worth saying, I would agree with Kath that safeguarding policies and all those policies around drug education and so on are embedded into the school. Our safeguarding, the Leeds safeguarding team, undertakes audits around safeguarding procedures, and all those aspects come into that whole agenda of what they're looking at, of whether things are in place, whether it's effective, and so on. So I think there's that reassurance that that's in place. This is sort of like coming on that's new, that where we as a local authority can utilise our influence to bring people together. For example, West Yorkshire Police, how do they support the school system and so on.
Briefly come back. Thanks for that. That explains it. The one thing I would just say is things like cyberbullying. It's an evolving thing, and I think that it would be worth keeping that on the agenda, even if schools are up to date with it. As new things come on, like for example vaping, it can be that there's pressure into young people vaping, and pressure around getting hold of vapes or being forced with vapes. These things progress, so I think that if it's possible to include that as an ongoing, evolving problem. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Manaka.
Thank you, Chair. Just to say, it's been great, Kath, to listen to what you've said, and I'll just touch on point 7.3 priority 3 under the second action and third action. I've got a daughter who is SEND in high school, and I really welcome the objective of change program pilots and to review the curriculum there, and possibly the toolkits. And I'll just touch on possibly what they use in maths and SEND children. I really do think that would be nice to see how that's going to be, because there's just so much of, if I look at my daughter being in primary school and now being in high school, she's really dropped. And I'm not sure whether it's primary school using something that a SEND child is able to kind of like understand. And is there anything that's different that is not being given to high school? Because for me, and even herself, should tell you that, Mom, if you work in, because I kind of like hinted what I do in council, and she goes, but why is maths not the same as in primary? So I welcome priority 3, and it would be great to see how we are going to work on maths and science for SEND kids and improving that for them. That's going to be really great. Thank you.
Can I just introduce Liz Canning, who works for the 11 to 19 improvement team, who will be able to just answer briefly, give you some sense of that.
Hello. So in primary, there is across the nation, there is a focus on teaching for understanding. With primary schools, there's been a lot of support from National Centre of Education of Teaching Mathematics that have supported this teaching relational understanding using manipulatives to support pupils' understanding. It is still developing in secondary. And so therefore, part of my role is actually I'm supporting the maths hubs to actually deliver the programme. And we then use those through our secondary networks to ensure that we've got teaching for mastery and teaching for understanding, relational standing, in association with the SEND curriculum review, so that we can have that conversation about how students learn maths best. So that's what's happened.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Yeah.
Will that lead to a more pictorial and object-based foundation to new learning, then moving to the more abstract, as in primary, for maths?
The idea around teaching for mastery is that you look at a concrete, pictorial and abstract development. So Primary is essentially looking at the fundamentals of number and relationships between the relational understanding of it. The development is that you're then looking towards teaching abstract, because you still need concepts of abstract concepts to enable A level and moving on to a higher education in terms of mathematics and to be able to use those skills. But the idea wholly behind it is that you develop the total understanding so that you can accelerate progress later on through the older years.
Just out of interest, are there still, for those children who leave primary school at not at expected level, are there still materials that they can use for, say, I'm just thinking base 10, and to support decimal understanding as well? Are they still available? Because in my school, where the maths when I started was very, very poor, it was a primary school, but the first thing I did was just buy all those materials that were needed to give them that base on which to then have that pictorial and the abstract concepts built.
In summary, yes. And it's also using the manipulatives, the base 10, and then it's moving to the abstract to then put them into a pictorial representation.
I think it would be really good to have just kind of resources at the back of the class that if children just need them. I know my daughter didn't have a great maths education in terms of number and base 10 when she was probably year 2, 3 and 4. And for her A-level biology, I could still see what that was an issue. And I just think, yeah, maybe the 10s and the 1s, it was beyond that. But I just think some kind of having that available, if pupils need that, and they can just choose to get it if it would aid them, I think that would be really helpful.
Thank you for that. Thank you very much. Councillor Stevenson is the last person that's indicated, which is good because I'm looking at the clock.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair. What a baptism of fire cast today with 2 former pupils. But I suspect you'd have the full room with you if you upgraded it and made me the first person to have a fixed term exclusion in the in the city. My question, I've got 2 questions. The first, on priority 1, action 2, it talks about offering communication language programs based on the high indices of multiple deprivation. And I just want to check, is there a possibility that this could be more granular in detail? And I say, like, I did I was involved in an Ofsted inspection recently, where in one of the most deprived parts of the city, I think it was about something like 46 different languages, and the deprivation indices are off the scale. And Ofsted recorded there that the data shows that deprivation is clearly not a factor. In fact, in school, it's hard to acknowledge that there's any deprivation at all. And I put that into context because if we look at Progress 8, some of those schools in the most deprived areas are getting better Progress 8 scores for disadvantage than in other areas of the city. So are we spreading the resource appropriately? For example, the school I've just mentioned would be caught in that, but does it really need it? Whereas there might be schools elsewhere. So is there a way to look at it based on data and performance and attainment rather than just disadvantage, would be my first question.
Yeah, I think you're right, Councillor Stevenson, and I think on this one particularly, so we tend, the teams that I work with tend to have traditionally looked at sort of like the lowest 20% to try and support, because there's not sort of everybody to go around everybody. On this one in particular, it will be trying to focus our support to those settings that have low deprivation, but also have low sort of historical scores of foundation stage data. So you're right. There are some, there's often cases where schools are doing it. They've got things in place, they've got certain systems, and it's working really well. We wouldn't just go in if their data is showing that things are good, we try and target to those schools that have got historically lower results.
It's reassuring, thanks. And the second question was, there doesn't seem to be much in here around behaviour policy. And when we talk about attainment, attendance, that behaviour often underpins a lot of that. So to Tony's point earlier, that suspensions often arise because of behaviour, and there's the age-old argument of, if you didn't have that suspension, have the people in school, what disruption are they having to the learning of others, and the balancing up of all that. But the Teacher Tap app recently surveyed teachers, and one of the biggest feature that came out in the thing that teachers said that really disrupts them and that it would make it a lot easier for them to teach is behaviour. So how are we looking at that citywide to make sure we've got consistent behaviour policies so teachers are confident in what they can do and that we can make the best use of classroom time for all pupils?
So I don't think the fact it's not explicit in here means it's been ignored at all. As I say, we responded to education leaders of what further support they needed. I think education leaders are reporting that they have more challenging children and everything, but schools and academies have their own behaviour systems, and they access training for their staff on those behaviour systems. In terms of a citywide drive for it, that would be hard to create any homogeneity. You would still have to accept that those leaders would work differently, and certainly we have the teams that support that. I think the support they're asking for is more around, again, as referred earlier, access for social, emotional, mental health, and which then are displaying as behaviour issues in schools. So I think there is some of that more that we're trying to support them on, strategies to support children in that way. But yes, Councillor Stevenson, there isn't a direct, we will support you in improving behaviour, because that didn't come through strongly as a priority need from them, despite them saying that behaviour is a challenge in schools. But it's certainly something we need to reflect and see that we are still supporting schools with. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for that. That was really helpful. And we gave that a significantly longer airing because I think it was a huge amount to cover. Just one observation from me, and it's a minor observation, but we refer in this report to SEND-COs, and the nationally accepted description is SENCO. And the only reason I mention it is sometimes there are so many abbreviations that when we stray away from something that is nationally seen as well, and I'm sure most people will work it out, I just think it's helpful to try to stick to the nationally agreed approach. I know lots of people do refer to them as SEND-COs, but generally and nationally, then the qualification itself is a SENCO qualification. Yeah, Kath.
Thank you. Happy to, I'm sure the service would be happy to move it to either way. I think it was in response to move to the fact that SEND is so much more used by the DFE now with the SEND and AP programme and the SEND change programme, etc. SEND and alternative provision programme, sorry, and the SEND change programme and the SEND, it's being used more. So probably about 50-50 in the city now of which they use, but happy, I'm sure the service would be happy to go back to the SENCO. It was more just to reflect that push from the DFE to have the D in there for more of their work. They don't say it's an SEN but happy to go back to that, whichever is, if that makes it more recognisable.
Yeah, I think it's in terms, everyone, you're absolutely right, refers to SEND, S-E-N-D in the wider, but in terms of the specific role, actually, even the DFE refer to them as SENCOs, not SENDCOs. It's really splitting hairs, but I just think in terms of that consistency across the piece, so that we all know exactly who we're talking about, and it's really clear we're not suggesting that there's another person that runs that. It's just around consistency of messaging. Thank you, everybody, for that. Moving on then to item 10, the work programme. Rob.
Thank you, Chair.
Yes, the Appendix 1 contains the latest version of the work programme of the board. I think the main change to note is EHCP inquiry, which is ongoing. That there was planned to be a session here today, but that has now moved to January, where there will be the summary of the recent working group and the exec board report that was referenced earlier as part of the item. Other than that, there is a budget 24-25 working group coming up in December, which is on the 19th of December at 1:30, which I just thought I'd highlight to members. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And also, just so we're picking this up formally as part of the meeting, we discussed in the pre-meet something that sort of came out of the working group as well, was that to look in the future to have somebody from the Parents and Carers Forum on this board to give that, to capture that voice of the parent carer of young people with additional needs. Thank you for that. Date and time of next meeting, next formal. Councillor Martin. Sorry, yeah.
Sorry, just on that last, were we going to do a follow-up about the impact of the legislation on asylum-seeking children? We agreed at the last meeting that that would be put back onto the work programme. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Martin. Yes, I did adjust the minutes, which is in the agenda pack from last time. I do need to speak to the chair in more detail, but there's certainly the fact that it's not there does not indicate we're not bringing it back, so it will feature again. Thank you.
I assure you, I hadn't forgotten. Date and time of next meeting, next formal board meeting, Wednesday, the 24th of January, 2024, by which time I might have got used to writing 24 instead of 23. Thank you very much, everybody. If I don't see you before, have a happy, Merry Christmas, happy and healthy New Year, and a happy Hanukkah, should you choose to celebrate.